Okay, the evocateurs for the first session, I will turn this over to Marlene Smith and Mary O'Connor.
Okay, it was so wonderful to meet all of you. I know many of you from previous academies and other ways that we've connected, but some of you are new, so it's wonderful to have new participants in the Summer Academy. So this is our first session. We're launching it off, and the focus of this session, we have two questions that we want to reflect on in this session. And it's, how can caring science inform leadership practice? And the second one is, how can we make caring more visible? Mary and I intend to invite reflection on these questions through sharing your stories, our stories about living caring in our leadership, or experiencing a situation in which we experienced another's caring-based leadership. So now the question, as you hear these questions, it will invite us to deeply listen to the stories that you will bring forth and to uncover the linkages between the elements that we hear within these stories to the theories and research related to caring. So this is the substantive knowledge about caring, or what we call caring science. So we have suggested for this particular session a few readings that might be a point of reference for this knowledge of caring, and you will have examples to share. Besides the readings that we have, many of you have already done additional readings, so you will bring that to our dialogue. In our session, we suggested chapters 2 and 7 in the text, Healthcare System Transformation for Nursing and Healthcare Leaders, Implementing a Culture of Caring by Boykin, Schoenhofer, and Valentine. Also an article by Angela Prestia on existential authenticity, caring strategies for living leadership presence, and also the AONL competencies for nursing leadership focused on the science, art, and the leader within. My esteemed and experienced co-evocateur, Mary O'Connor, is going to get us started by sharing a story of living caring in leadership. I know you received from Dr. Boykin a letter that kind of lays out the structure for our Summer Academy, but for those who are new, I just want to remind you, this isn't a lecture. You know, we're in this circle together, and I'm here to learn. Mary's here to learn, just as you all are here to learn, and we learn from each other. So it is this reflective dialogue where we listen deeply to the stories, the examples, the questions, and then we all respond. We'd like this to be, you know, this is the first time that we've done this on Zoom, obviously. So we want this to be a natural process as much as possible, at least try to see if that's possible. Of course, you can post some things in chat and we will address those questions if they come forth. But, you know, if you want to speak, we'd like you to just, you know, jump in there. And if we're speak over each other, we'll take turns, you know, but we would like it to be as natural a process as possible. So now I'm going to turn this over to Mary for her sharing of a story that she has.
Thanks, Marlene, and welcome everyone, and especially Melissa, who I was listening to very carefully, who talked about looking for ways to care for nurse leaders, leaders caring for leaders. And that is really the core of my story. Caring leadership, or being a caring leader. As I was thinking about this session and what I might tell to start it off, I kept coming back to this vague but accurate saying that you know it when you see it. You feel it, you see it in the people you care for, you see it in the people caring for you. And this story is from my last full-time practice role in a community hospital in Virginia. I was the director of nursing in charge of all the nursing services throughout the organization, all the managers and support departments, compliance, informatics, infection control, everything with a nurse at the helm reported to me. We were facing a crisis in the perioperative area. The manager had been hired about 10 months ago after a huge search. She came from a bigger city. Everyone loved her, and she was making positive changes. Suddenly, I started noticing changes in the way she was with other people. She started coming in late. She would come in late to meetings, or she would come in and engage for a little while and take a call and leave. She was dismissive and surly with staff, physicians, and me. I met with her several times over the course of several months, and the excuses were they flowed: tired, busy, overwhelmed. Satisfaction plummeted, cases started late, turnover suffered, the schedule was changed without notice. We made action plans, but soon her staff, peers, and physicians were coming to me. She was unresponsive, closed up in her office, and was seen in the coffee shop for long periods in the afternoon. She had done more than enough to be fired. It was obvious to me, though, that she was hurting and something serious was happening with her. So instead of just firing her or making more action plans, I went to my HR colleague who was known for restorative interventions, and together we agreed on a different course of action. It was costly, but we sent her to kind of a retreat house in North Carolina, sort of a rehab for overworked, stressed out executives. When she came back, she appeared to be healthy and happier. She stayed through a transition to new management after finding a job back in the city where she thought she would be better suited. This is obviously a true story. I had several stories to choose from, but this was probably the most dramatic example of thinking outside the box and trying to be a caring leader and caring for this person as a human being more than caring for her as the head of an important department. So I had identified, after I read and reread this story, some of the caring ingredients that Meyerhoff talks about, or the C's. But I wonder first if there's any response from all of you, or about what you heard in that story.
Well, it's Melissa, I guess. It sounds like there was an in-depth search. You thought you had the right person, and it started out well, and then there was a change. And maybe she didn't know how to ask for support, or she was so overwhelmed that she just withdrew from everybody, and there was really no leadership in the OR, and it just made things go hectic. And then of course it would affect her a lot, because if everyone's complaining.
I'd be interested, Mary, as to what was it that made you decide that firing was not the best thing, regardless of coming from your knowledge of caring science. What was it that she did or said that got you in a different way? Because that's what got me.
Thanks, Jalma. I confess that I really was not a student of caring science at the time this situation occurred. So I think that's a very good question. I'm not really sure. I really liked this person. As Melissa said, I thought she was the right person for the job, and frankly, so did everyone else. I didn't feel like she duped us. Maybe I felt that we duped her into thinking the job was different. I don't know. But I just knew, and obviously I'd been a leader for a long time. I've fired people before. But for some reason, I felt like it was really a call for help, and more than a discipline issue. So I felt like I needed to respond to the call for help.
Thank you. That's helpful, because I was hoping that that was where you were going to go, because I think this is one of the key pieces for me is you weren't just the leader. You were a person watching someone else hurting, and the hurt got to you. And it was like, what can I do to help support this person? This is what I got when you were talking. And you reached out for help, asked the HR person, and you came up with a different way that didn't escalate more of the whatever was going on with her, or what you guys were seeing as the result and the manifestation of her particular issue. So I'm impressed that you were able to do that, and the opportunity to give her the chance to be away, which possibly gave her the opportunity to say, this is not for me, as opposed to acting it out. So you really did. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps. She should have written you letters of thank you. So thank you, Mary. This was wonderful to hear.
Mary, this is Melissa. Did you say how long after she came back from the retreat that she stayed or made that decision to leave?
Yeah, it was, so obviously in a 2-minute story, I couldn't give all the details, but yeah, basically when she came back, she knew that she wanted to transition to something else, but agreed to stabilize the department, do some healing work for herself and everyone else, because obviously there was a call for her head from multiple places. There was a lot of pressure to just cut and run. So there was a lot of healing that was done over the course of several months. And then she transitioned to back to the city into a job that maybe suited her better.
Mary, this is Kathleen. And I think that your story speaks to Roach's caring as a human mode of being. You said you weren't a student of caring at the time, but if now you were to connect it back to some of the theoretical concepts, I think that would be one of them, and that nursing as caring, that's a core value that you lived, and that you enlisted the HR person to live with you, along with the nurse that you cared for. And so I think that's an example of sort of nursing as caring, and then now you're connecting it theoretically. So I think it's a great story.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kathleen. Yeah, as I was thinking about stories, now that I am a student of caring science, you can look back at your career and make those connections. And that's really why I wanted to bring this forward into this academy, so that the scholars who have been living caring science for so long can make those connections from the theory to the story, and maybe some of those that are newer to caring science can make the connections from the story to the theory. So I think that's why the stories are in our experience are so important. And I would love to hear if someone else has a kind of story that they would like to share of a caring nurse situation.
Mary, this is Nancy France, and I just wanted to build on what your story, what you said, and what Jamal said, and that is you heard the call for nursing. You know, it's not just responding as a person, but you heard the call for nursing, and that's, you know, we use that framework too, as you know, but hearing that call and responding as a nurse, which is to me greater than as a person, because it's nurse as caring. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Nancy. And Mary, there is a comment from Sabina in the chat. So I wondered, Sabina, if you would like to just say it rather than me read it in the chat.
Okay. Well, I was just reflecting on some of Meyerhoff's caring ingredients, and to me, I think Mary and her HR colleague showed courage, definitely, in taking this somewhat unusual step rather than what might be the usual approach of, you know, telling her to leave. And also, I think hope was there too.
Yeah.
And on her part, I am really impressed with her humility in accepting this opportunity to refresh and reconsider and to accept your caring for her. Because sometimes accepting caring when it's unexpected, it takes some humility, and that in itself is an ingredient of caring. So thank you for the way you cared for her.
I think there's one other piece that I got out of this, because another question, Mary, if that's possible, around did you see any responses from the people who initially had difficulty with her? And thank you for the opportunity to do some of that.
You mean the other people, you
The
mean
other-
their peers and
The
the
peers
staff
and other
and-
leaders of staff, because as a role model, you manifested exactly, you lived that caring, and you know, as a nurse, as a person, as a human being, and you put all of those together. And I wonder if other people saw or experienced that, or able to say to you, gee, that was wonderful, and I wouldn't have thought of that. And as a role model, to move that forward, to imply that even though it may not have been your intention, but how we can get things that we don't intend actually occur when we behave like this.
Yeah, I think the response was, boy, are you lucky that worked out. You know,
Well, there's humor for you. There's humor. I think we need humor in all our leadership roles.
yeah, I definitely think that there was a lot of skepticism. You know, when we sent her to the place, there was kind of a relief. And when she came back and did the healing work, I think there was some acknowledgement that there is a different way to do things. I don't really, nothing stands out to me that somebody really came and said, wow, that was really amazing. But I think maybe their lack of saying something disparaging was the message. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I see some hands up too, Rodnita and Griselle.
So Mary, I just wanted to say thank you for sharing that story. And I was sitting here reflecting on it, and I was just drawing parallels. So the story you spoke of is coming from the clinical practice area as it relates to a leader in that space. But then as I sit and reflect on kind of my role in the university and the student experience, I was thinking about a story from just earlier this year when we sometimes have students that come into the program that are very eager and excited and engaged. And sometimes something happens and they seem to kind of regress or fall to the back. And something happens where we have to approach that student in a different way. And so when those students, for example, are unsuccessful in their studies, and they have to have an appeal, for example. And so I was thinking about a particular student who was unsuccessful in our program and was given another opportunity. And so, I just saw the parallels in that student story again, as I think about the story that you shared. And so that student actually did reach out to the circle that were kind of charged with making a recommendation. And she was very grateful and appreciative of that opportunity. And so I think, while your story was very specific to the clinical space, there are some parallels that we can see and draw upon as it relates to like the student experience.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rodnita. I think it's a universal story that can be fit in many ways. Thank you. Hi, Grizel.
Hi, I would like, thank you for sharing that story. And as you were reading it, I almost had a deja vu ×2 because I can relate to both sides of the story. I have been the disengaged, the enthusiastic employee or leader that slowly disengages. And I have also been the leader that needs to do my job and manage the team of perhaps people that are feeling the same way. And when you were speaking, I was going through some of the materials for this particular time, and it reaffirmed to me. I'm looking right now at the nurse manager competencies document, and when I looked at the model, it reaffirms to me once again that when you look at these three circles, one is not bigger than the other. They are all the same size, which means that all of these three components, the science, the leader within, and the art, are equally important, and it needs to be developed at the same time. And they're interconnected. And from your story, and as I related back to my own experience, when we tell people to come to work as their whole selves, that's a big ask because that means that many of us have a lot of external trauma or drama that we bring to work. And sometimes people, when I see leaders that go from place to place, and there's like this, when you look at their resume and like every 2 or 3 years, they go to a different place to work, I'm always intrigued by why that happens. And more often than not, when I talk to a few of them, and I consider, and I include myself there, is because at some point, their passion and their vision started to deviate from the passion and the vision of the organization where they were working. But if we're not clear internally about what it is that we stand for, we can get all that noise kind of get in the way of the work that we are hired to do and that we love to do. And when I was listening, I kept thinking to myself, why did it wait so long for her to ask her, is everything okay at home? Because I'm pretty sure that there's something happening at home that is probably causing a lot of this stuff. And it can be anything from I miss my family to I didn't think that this was the right place for me to be. And thank you for giving her permission to decide that she needed to grow in somebody else's garden. Because I think that's what you did. I think that you fertilize, you gave her probably the peace of mind to make the decision and not being viewed I don't think, even the fact that she left, to me, I don't see that as a failure. I actually see that as a gift that you gave her, not only for herself, but also for your group. So thank you for sharing that.
Mhm. And thank you for connecting that with the AUNL nurse manager competencies. I really, I integrate those where I'm teaching as well. And as someone else said, you know, taking this from practice, I feel like the group that I am nurse to depends on where I am working. So I haven't really worked with patients in a while, but I am a nurse to my staff, or am I a nurse to my students? And that's why I think these stories are so universal. Thank you. Armil, I know you had your hand up and you also put something in the chat.
Yes, I'm just interested, coming from a different perspective, because we see when we appoint nurses to be leaders or to be nurse managers, whatever capacity then they are, and I see this often in the clinical setting as well. Coming from their perspective, they may think that they assume the managerial role without losing their leadership skills and influencing their staff and others to what their purpose on the job. I don't know if there's an onboarding process or like the gradual, how do you call that, that they will be on
Orientation.
board for the role first before they assume that managerial role, because we see in them some leadership skills. That's why we appoint them to that role. And then they change suddenly and they become overwhelmed and they become disengaged or disillusioned, and plus the trauma or other factors involved in assuming such role, and it becomes unsuccessful or hectic for them. As this conference is about leadership and caring based perspective, what you did was very caring, but in the other side of the coin for the healthcare system, is there an onboarding process that we can enhance or fine tune to help our potential nurse leaders to assume this role in the future?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think that onboarding is so much more popular now than it was back then. And this nurse was not just promoted from another role. She had been a successful nurse manager in other places. So I don't really remember the onboarding itself, but I think it was more of onboarding her to the facility and introducing her to the way we were in that organization. But I agree with you, and I will tell you that, you know, I was one of those nurse managers who was promoted in the beginning for my my leadership in the clinical role without much you know, training or education. I was an associate degree nurse who was a really good clinician, probably a little bossy. My key phrase in my first management interview was, you know, I'm the oldest of 8 children, and I've been in charge since I was 2.5. My whole life I've been in charge. So how hard can it be? Well, you know, you find out that being in charge of your 7 brothers and sisters is a little bit different than how you have to be in charge of your peers in a professional setting. So some people figure that out and some people don't. I don't know. But thank you, Armil. I definitely think that the movement towards onboarding, the educational opportunities that managers have today have really, you know, exploded. And I think it's really wonderful, the resources that we have today.
Oh, thank you.
And Claudia, I see your hand up too.
Hi, let me turn my camera around here. We're trying to do this from our conference room. Great story, Mary. So many thoughts that go through my mind, but one of them that sticks with me is that this story makes caring leadership visible. It was visible between the interaction with you and the nurse manager, but everybody around you. So you can, you know, as a leader, displaying that is that we have to set the culture of caring. We have to be able to show people what it looks like, as well as, you know, the science and the literature and everything. It's those actions that people watch in us. I, like you, was a nurse manager before I even understood what that was all about. And it was like, okay, how do you do this? And so I think you've showed us one way how to do it. So I thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. And I'm seeing some more good points in the chat. Sylvia, I love your note here about being attuned to those dynamics, and that relates really closely with the AONL competencies of relationship building, right? You really, the way of being attuned to dynamics in the people you serve is really through those caring relationships. So would you like to add something to that?
Mary, thank you. Yes, I think it is critically important for those of us who are serving others. At the end of the day, that's what I believe that we do. That's how I see my role. Because while you were focused on that one individual, you also in describing your story talked about the behaviors. And so as a leader, how did those behaviors impact? You mentioned the staff, the physicians, and over time it just starts, then the circle starts broadening. And if we are just concerned with getting through the day with our tasks or the functions, etc., that we may lose sight of these other things that are really impacting others. And the earlier we intervene, the better opportunity we have to make an impact on the person who's hurting, as you mentioned, and the ripple effect on those that he or she are connected. It sounds like someone's in agreement with those comments.
Yeah.
Rodnita had some really wonderful comments. Would you be willing to kind of share those, Rodnita?
Oh, sure. I just think that in that example that Mary shared, she was distinguishing herself as a leader and just not managing processes. I think that if she was just being a manager and not exercising true leadership, you know, she may have just kind of cut this individual off. She said when she presented the story that there were more than sufficient reason to terminate this individual, but you know, she was coming from a place of caring, and whether she identified it in that moment or not, she was, as she said, she was nursing that individual. And so I just think that that shows true leadership, which is very distinct and apart from being a manager, in my opinion. I also recently, in completing some dissertation coursework earlier this spring, I was introduced to a Posner and Coe's book, and the title of it is Model the Way. And I just truly see that what Mary did in that situation was she modeled the desired behaviors that we want to see in our leaders. And even though that individual went on to go to a different place of employment, I would imagine that she took some of how she was treated and cared for by Mary and the other individuals in that organization. She carried that with her. And so again, I think it's just being not do as I say, but do as I do mentality. And so Mary truly modeled the desired behaviors. And I think it's just a rippling effect of that, that Mary will never truly probably know the impact of it. But I think that, you know, it will stay with that individual and everyone else that was part of that situation as they go on in their various roles. So.
I see that Shirley posted something. So Shirley, would you like to share that comment and perhaps give an example? You said, I find this grounds my approach. I don't know if you might be willing to share an example of how seeing others as caring person and asking how caring is being lived in the moment might ground your approach to leadership.
Oh, sure. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I know when we look at that, the languaging, it sometimes almost seems too simple in terms of how do you actually live this and what is the impact of approaching difficult situations, or any situation for that matter. But I know, particularly with working with students, that sometimes you have a situation where their behavior is not what you would hope for. And rather than react to the behavior, I find that if I try and focus on the individual student as a caring person, and then try and understand how they are living caring in the moment. Dr. Joy Longo and I did a series of nursing situations around ethics one time, and we had stories in which students, for example, came late to a meeting, and certainly this can occur in any kind of organizational setting as well. And then what we shared, what some common thoughts might be in terms of its disrespectful behavior, those kinds of things. And then we had the student side of it, and what was going on in their life, and why they were late. And it really changes the dialogue between the individuals. If you just stop and try and see the person as a caring person, and that they are living caring in the moment. I may not interpret it that way in the moment, and I may not understand it, but if I'm open to understanding it, then that becomes helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. And Dawn, you had a beautiful quote here in the chat. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I often feel that, in my life, coming from a premise of there's a reason why people behave the way they behave. So instead of making a quick judgment about a person, it's always good to look at why, ask the question, why are they behaving that way? Which I think is what you did, Mary. You looked at, there has to be a reason why this person is behaving this way. And then having a dialogue, finding out what can we do to help versus being very punitive. So, I mean, I can really identify with the story. And that's why I put the quote in that before, as Dr. Gordon was just saying, before you make that quick judgment, see that person as a caring person, and then start from that foundation of love, caring. And how would you like to be treated? Would you want someone to spend that time and find out what can we do to help? Instead of this, I know there are some places that do this one strike and you're out kind of attitude. But what if we turn that around and say, what can we do to help? We're here for you. What can we do to help? And I think if a lot of leaders do that or did that, they may find that we have a very high rate of nurses leaving the workforce. I hear people say, oh, nurses, we have a shortage of nurses. I sometimes wonder how accurate that is. And I wonder if we look at how many nurses are staying, they're eager. We put as faculty, they eager to start work. And within a year, we hear they've left the workplace, they've left, or they don't want to be bedside nurses. And I think we need to look at ourselves and nurse leaders and see what is going on. I mean, to kind of flip the mirror and see what is going on. Are we coming from this premise of love, caring, values when we deal with our new nurses?
Anne, you have a comment in the chat. Would you like to share it?
Well, I think, Mary, as I listen to your story and think about that, it became clear to me that you were clear on who you were as caring person. You were living the trust, the hope, the courage in order to support a nurse. You were living, caring for that person of nurse so that that person could nurse colleagues in that they may carry out their nursing role. I just thought it was a really beautiful example of not judging, but really being concerned about and valuing person. And I think one lesson might be to hear, to really truly listen to the story of what we see in practice and to reflect on that and ask oneself, well, how is that person living their caring? You know, if she had the call for hope, the hope that you would see her and value her as person and trust that, you know, you would do what ought to be done to nurture and support her. So I just thought it was a beautiful story that brings out so many, many important points in caring-based leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And
Thanks, Anne.
Nancy Hilton is in the chat, and she said she has a similar but different story to share. So maybe Nancy, you could share that with us.
Thank you, Marlene. So I would say this happened probably about 3 months into COVID, and had a nursing director, large med surg unit. I'm going to call her Jane. Her name is not Jane, but and little hard to get to know her. So not as interactive with her colleagues. And I did touch base with a couple of people I thought she was a little bit closer to, but there were some behaviors that were not appropriate. And so I met with her the first time and very closed off, nothing's wrong, and very hard to connect with her. So, you know, I kind of wrapped it up and things weren't any better. So I had a second interaction, and it kind of reminded me a little bit of sometimes those of us who have children, some of that tough love conversation that you have to have with people. And I reiterated my expectations that were non-negotiable and what did she need from me? And again, it was more of a, there's nothing wrong, where I knew there was, but she just wasn't able to communicate or to share that with me. And so then I figured I was going to have to kind of go in a side door, and I just started spending more time with her on her unit, paying her more attention, recognizing her for some of the things that she was successful in, and things started to turn. And so again, back to Mary's story, you know, we have lots of different leaders in different situations. I knew there was some personal things going on, but also knew she didn't want to share that and didn't want to push her too hard if that's not what she wanted to do. But I'm very pleased at how she was able to make that turn, and, you know, maybe not the normal way that I interact with leaders, but I had to do it differently and had to have the courage and actually humility to be different with Jane. So thank you.
So what are comments related to Nancy's story as you think about it? One thing that comes to me is just that idea that people grow in caring in their own time, in their own way. You know, I think that Nancy, you were nurturing her growth in a way in your initial interactions with her, and you weren't seeing any changes, or you still saw her not acknowledging some of the some of what you noticed. And then you switched. It's alternating rhythms, I guess, as well as Myrock. You switched to another approach that could perhaps work in nurturing her growth and caring. So it's a beautiful story. Thank you.
You know, I hadn't thought about alternating rhythms. I share stories all the time with the nurses in orientation. You go from an end of life to, you know, a near drowning child in the ER, but that's exactly what I did. So thank you for sharing that.
And that takes a lot of courage too, Nancy, when you feel like you've gone down a path and you recognize in yourself that that's not the way to approach this situation, even though it's worked other times before in, you know, searching for or thinking outside the box to handle situations differently. So thank you so much for sharing that story. And looking at the chat, I see that Kathleen had proposed looking at a different way to look at nurse leader competencies in relation to caring science. And
Thanks,
I love this idea. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Thanks, Mary. I was looking at the competencies and they talk about the science, the leader within, and the art. And I like those categories. But when you start looking more deeply into the words that are used to describe each of those, they're very prescriptive or transactional. And one of the things that we talked about in the in the text that we're using for these couple of days is the necessity of not only learning business language, which is a lot of what are in these competencies, but pairing that with caring language. And your story does that. And I think that one of the things I put in there is page 200, which you can't, the production of care cannot be separated from the person. So when you're a nurse leader in an organization, either academic or health system, there's work to be done, and that work has to be done. And there's accountability to team members about having that work done. So you, at the same time, you can't separate the person from that. And when I look at these competencies, what I wish is for a revision of them that also includes the science of caring as one of the competencies. So anyway, I have a critique of this and like it and think that there's more to grow within that model. Just thoughts about that.
I thought the same thing as I was reviewing these competencies, and I thought that actually, you first of all, you look at them and you think, oh, leader within, that's where we focus, that's where caring is. But when you look across the art, science, and the leader within, I think the art and science, every one of those could be transformed from a caring-based perspective. So that, I don't know if I could look at an example of one of those. So let's say technology, I just picked that out. Technology, so understanding the effect of IT on patient care. I mean, taking each one of those and really reflecting on, we have caring theories based on, Loxton theory, to look at technology as caring, and so there's a way to take these and really infuse into it our caring perspective, caring science perspective.
I see a crosswalk. And just in keeping commitments to oneself, I think coming to know oneself as a caring person and coming to know others as caring. I just, we have so much substantive knowledge that I think we don't bring to the forefront of in the work that we do as nurse leaders. And I think these competencies adopt others' language.
Yeah, and doing that, the work that you're talking about, which I think Savina responded to, wouldn't this be a great, project to come out of this academy? And what it would do is really make it more visible and hardwire it into the, these competencies so that it isn't separate. It isn't like the art and science is separate from caring. It's right there. It's in that, yeah.
One of the things that we did at the AHNA, for 2 years, we did a project on going from personal values of the members to the organizational values. And I know in the book, there's a lot of discussion about values and values-based, and how do we go from that to caring. And one of the things we did over a 2-year period, we came up with a way to take the values and to identify what the values were from everybody. And we did a Delphi kind of research project, and then put it all together, and then came up with the goals, that the values that we have now. But we also put the task force got together and looked at what are the observable behaviors, what are the observable activities, what are the things that we could see, hear, feel, taste, touch, and we came up with them. And that took 2 years for us to do that. So I was really thrilled about the opportunity to really talk about how do you translate compassion into observable behaviors. And we did do it. And we're translating it now into things that we want to put into the performance evaluations. So I think that, I would love to participate in, if we do that, if you choose to do that, because this is I think a really important thing when we're talking about not just for the individual, but for the organization itself, and the creation of ways to actually help people know what does it look like when you're caring and compassionate.
Thank you for that, Jamal. Jalma, sorry.
It's okay. It's all right. It happens all the time.
You probably get that your whole life, didn't you?
I do. It's okay.
As I reflect on the sharing, it's very nursing focused, and in this area of competency and adding the competency of nursing as caring, very, very important work ahead. But I'm also thinking about our colleagues. We're speaking our language, and I wonder what this is going to sound like to those who are not in this particular field. They're on our periphery. It's just a thought. I don't have the answer.
So, Sylvia, some of what we did in an earlier summit, ABI Summit, was interprofessional competencies and caring. And on the ABI website, there's a toolkit that crosswalks that. It's a beginning. I appreciate what you're saying, because within this group, that language can become dominant. That's an attempt that we did in that summit, and was an outcome of that summit that helps to do that crosswalk.
And, Griselle just commented that she's done similar work. She crosswalked this same model with Watson Caring Science at Stanford. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, Griselle.
Sure. I'm going to have to say about 4 or 5 years ago, 4 years ago, maybe, we started a leadership development program for our charge nurses, part of our succession planning for leadership. And that now has kind of graduated to Leadership Academy. And the models that we used to frame our Leadership Academy was based on this particular model. Obviously, Watson Caring Science, because it's part of our professional practice model. We also use the nurse leader competencies from AONL. And I had the same reaction when I read the circle with the leader within. I thought that they were very transactional and just kind of paid lip service to the quote unquote soft skills. And even when you read through them, they don't even touch the surface of real internal work. And we felt that that was needed. So that's why we were using Caring Science as the foundation for that inner work. So what I decided to do was to read every single one of the competencies for those two models or frameworks, and we crosswalked it with Watson's Carita processes, so that when we were discussing, our entire academy is kind of based on these three buckets, if you will. So when we talk about it, to everybody's point, when we talk about the science or managing the business, we frame it through the lenses of Caring Science. And we started with our charge nurse and leadership academies for just nursing. And then we very quickly realized that this was needed for everybody, to whoever was the last person who spoke about the need to bring along our colleagues. So now we are using the same language when we are training. I guess they're not considered charge nurses, but the charge person, whether it's respiratory or in the lab or whatever it is, and also for our Leadership Academy. And it's become a very popular course that we teach, and people appreciate it. And they probably get more about their need for developing the essence or their way of being, and how that then informs all the other technical aspects of their role. So I'll be more than happy to share it with you guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Melissa has her hand up.
Sorry, I got to come off mute. One of the things that I feel is very important in leadership development is concentrating on the leadership team and making them understand about caring for each other. And I have found when you can do that, they belong, they care for each other, they protect each other, they help each other, and it really affects the staff too, which is nice because they see that. They see that if they need something and I'm there, I'm gonna help them even though I'm not their leader. Or, I think it's really, really important that leaders not only learn about caring from themselves, but caring for their colleagues and how that looks. And that takes a lot of understanding of each other's feelings. And I think that's a very important aspect also in not only retention, but the leaders feeling happiness because they're not alone, and they can really trust and support each other. And I think in leadership, especially nursing leadership, it's all about trust and caring. And that's where you get the longevity of leaders.
Thank you.
Thanks for bringing that up, Melissa. In my story, that was evident when the peers of this manager came to me. They were not complaining. They were really caring. They were also trying to reach her and, trying to help her, and needed help with doing that. And I absolutely think that is so important to happiness and joy in a workplace when you have colleagues and peers that really support each other. And I'll tell you, once you have that, you're pretty intolerant for being in a place where that does not happen.
That is so true. Or someone that just doesn't fit in or want to fit in or have that caring mentality. And sometimes, you know, the culture is not a fit for them.
Mhm. Thank you.
Mary and Marlene, one of the things, if it's okay to bring up, is I've been looking at some of the chat comments, and I love the term nimble caring and servant leader and quite a few of the other reciprocal caring relationships. I think it's critical with the leader. Is part of, and it came evident with the stories that were told, is being able to know where to go or what style to use based on who you're addressing. Every colleague, nurse, associate comes from a different place, and sometimes one style of either nurturing or teaching or counseling doesn't work, and it's critical for nurse leaders to be able to realize there's many ways of approaching certain challenges and knowing if one is not working, and before giving in, and as you said, the easiest thing is to, well, let's just fire, is to try another route and to recognize that there may be different ways to approach challenges, and not to give up on someone just because the way you chose to approach didn't work. And to reach out to other people as for support, like going to the HR colleague to say, what other ways can we do instead of giving up on a person, is part of the caring model. And I think it's something that a lot of leaders don't know they have that availability, or they're not confident enough in being able to choose different ways. Everyone sees it as one way of doing things, and being able to step out of that box and try other ways is just, especially in nursing and wanting to live that caring model, is it needing to be able to find the way to reach someone via multiple means.
Thank you, Maria. That's why mentoring is so important, and role modeling, and having leaders have other leaders that they can look to, whether they're in their organization or not. That's one of the reasons why I love groups like this, professional association groups that are in my heart and really I respond to, because that's, you know, especially when you work in small organizations like I did, always in a community hospital with kind of one hierarchical model, you have to find that somewhere. Thank you.
Yeah, Jane, you brought up that term nimble caring. I wonder if you wanted to talk about it a little bit, even if you had an example of it. That would be great.
Zane, you're muted.
I have to behave myself with muting. Sometimes I don't pay attention. Anyway, I think that the story really helped me to think about situations in my life in clinical practice and also with our nursing center, and how when someone brought up not being punitive is a simplistic statement, but how you have to stand back. And then someone also talked about alternating rhythms from Meyerhoff. So I pulled my book and I was thinking about how people go from more specific frames to larger frames. And they sort of go between, I would say, a narrow, what Meyerhoff has is narrower to wider frameworks. And recognizing some insecurities, some isolations and so forth in the people that they serve. Then I started to think about the nimbleness of what the second story was that was told by our colleague, and I'm blocking on her name, I apologize, but and how she sort of went in, she used the phrase, the side door. So I started to think about what does side door really mean? I mean, in terms of caring, it's her metaphor for what she did to pay attention to this person to try to figure out what was really going on. So I thought that in her story, and in yours too, there was a step back and there was also an alternate way. And then I began to think about, has anybody, and I did a search already, Mary, I have to confess. I'm sort of looking for this nimble idea. And I didn't find much yet. That doesn't mean I'm done, because I want to pay attention to the dialogue too. But I think it's a really interesting idea that might combine with servant leadership. But of course, I'm going to say, why doesn't somebody write about this? Or somebody do a phenomenological study among nurse leaders about their nimbleness in relation to caring, looking at it from a framework. So I'm having a good time really thinking about this and paying attention to the storied nature of this and really what this teaches and all the brilliance that's coming out in the chats. It's really cool to watch these chats. So thanks for asking, but I think it deserves a little bit of attention, and maybe nimble isn't the right word. I don't know, but there's a competency here in caring about what people do somehow. Anyway, I'll mute. I'll behave myself, Brazil.
No, well, Mary Ellen, you have, you talked a little bit about the definition of professional versus a more expansive view of caring behavior.
I think that when we orient ourselves to any situation, we go back to what's the definition of how I should be in this situation. And I think often in our professional life, we value this professional behavior. And when even saying the words make me feel uptight, that it immediately puts some type of barrier, because it wouldn't be professional to recognize the person, or it wouldn't be part of a professional culture. We are supposed to look a certain way. We're supposed to express ourselves a certain way. So I sit here and think about how freeing it is to come from a caring approach, to recognize the individual, in the complex situation that surrounds both of us and both in the situation, and to understand the alternating rhythms that moment expresses to both of us in this relationship. So sometimes I sit here and think, do we need to go back and look at how we orient people to the arena in which we live and practice, to orient it a different way, to invite the person, not just the professional behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Mary?
Yes.
This is Charlotte.
Hi, Charlotte.
I'd like to share that the discussion this morning really parallels an article that's in the Harvard Business Review, and it's titled "Why Feedback Fails," that criticizing people does not help them excel. And so the language in the article does not, I don't think the word caring ever appears. It parallels what we're talking about. And it goes into the science behind criticizing people, that it really shuts them down. How by looking for the things that are going right, and by looking for the things that they are doing right, and this is similar to what Shirley was saying, looking for the caring in the person. The science behind it, according to the article, is that it actually floods the person with oxytocin, which actually then opens their mind to new thinking of new ways of being, creative approaches to solving an issue, or just opening up their mind to a new way of being. And that that for us to look at people in that way, and I really think that's how you looked at the person that you were working with, and didn't go into all the things that's wrong. and gave that person an opportunity to look inside herself. So this article is really important, I think, for our discussion too, with the science behind criticizing and praising someone, finding what's right. It also goes into telling a story about one of the coaches of the Dallas Cowboys, how all the videos, and the team had lost like so many games, and all the videos showed all the things they were doing wrong, dropping the ball, not running. I don't know any of the football terms, but everything was wrong. And he decided, rather than picking on all those things, that he would go and take a look at all the things that they did right in the videos. And the things that were wrong certainly outweighed the things that they had done right. And he focused on everything that they were doing right. And it really turned the team around. So I think that really parallels caring and our language of caring as well as what people are doing. So thank you, Mary, and thank you for letting me share.
I love that. I wonder if you could send us the reference so we have it. It's an excellent example. Thanks.
I will. Thank you.
Claire has her hand up.
Yes, thank you, everyone. This has been a very interesting topic in getting us started on looking at leadership. As I'm listening to everyone, what's coming into my mind and thoughts is that so often people are assuming, when they assume a leadership role and haven't had much education or support on it, in that autocratic type of leadership where, you know, that I have to lead, recognizing any weakness is, you know, if I show these types of things, I may be considered weak. But now, and as Charlotte, as you've identified in others, that we're moving beyond that. And that's what's really important for us to discuss and explore here, and to get out to people that a leadership with caring, and often, you know, I've seen in the chat servant leadership, there's relational leadership, authentic leadership, transformational. They all capture transformational. And the literature is now showing that, showing caring, showing these characteristics motivate and engage people and be successful. Not only increase job satisfaction, decrease turnover, and people really wanting to be the best that they can be. You know, when Juanita talked about Cruz and Posner's model, the way is one way, but one other piece of it is encouraging the heart. And I think that's very much what we're talking about, and it's important. So to shift the mindset of leadership, it isn't being that autocratic, do as I say, but it's more open and being real and authentic and encouraging the heart, which is what we describe as caring.
I love that, Claire. And I do want to say that, you know, this is literature outside of our literature in caring science. However, doing that crosswalk is really important to kind of address what Sylvia brought up. You know, this is our language, our science. Perhaps other disciplines may not be aware of it as we are. And so building those connections, I think is great. Thank you.
Anne has her hand.
Thank you. I was thinking about what Melissa and Sylvia have said, and Nancy Hilton, you can certainly pipe in on this because it was at your place, but it speaks to what Melissa was saying, the importance of engaging all leaders in an understanding of caring. And Sylvia, you know, how do you go about this language of caring so that it is understood? And I had the opportunity to work with Nancy, who was just beginning to initiate nursing as caring at her hospital. And Nancy had said, you know, it just can't be nursing. That became clear right after we got started. If we want this to be something that the organization values and can language. And so we had the opportunity to meet with all the what do you call it? The CEO, the COO, the CFO, all that suite. the O suite, and to really talk about caring and to invite them to share their story of how they live caring in their practice. And I'm not going to go into that because I know that article was one that you have read probably for this, but it was amazing, awesome experience to listen to their stories of living caring and how they could all connect to this value and for how this could impact and change the organization totally in terms of policies, procedures, all in all ways. And I know, Nancy, I'm not doing it justice, but it was a very, very powerful experience that I think helps one to see that the language of nursing has a very important, specific language of caring that relates to our practice discipline that has to be understood for nursing to be honored as it should be honored. But likewise, we need to understand the living of caring by other disciplines. So anyway, I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Hi, this is Nancy. Can I make a comment, please?
Please. Yes.
Thank you. You know, it was great working with Dr. Boykin, but what I was hearing, and we were in the process of working towards magnet, and you have to have a theory and a model of care, and we had done all of that. But I had the chief dietitian, I had a physical therapist say, oh, well, because we're not nurses, you don't think we care? And I'm going like, oh my goodness, Dr. Boykin, what are we going to do? And so we put our heads together and we had a broader term, and it is referenced in the article under where Sylvia and Terry will be speaking this afternoon, but we looked at it as the culture of caring. And so we have nursing is caring, but then we have the broader culture of caring, and it seemed to work for everybody. But the second thing that we did is we knew, because not everybody got the language, that we needed to demonstrate what that looked like. And I won't go into it because it's in the article, but that helped the other departments and the physicians absolutely tremendously. And just a quick story about that day, and I'll never forget it. It was May 10th, 2008. So I'm going into the story anyways, I'm sorry, but we encircled the hospital with 500 people, and that was our circle of caring. But the best story of the day was when a mother of an ER patient who was in a terrible motorcycle accident, and he actually died. And the family was all there with him at the end. And this mother said to the ER charge nurse, why is everybody outside around the hospital? You know, it seems like they're in a big circle around the hospital. And the charge nurse told her what we were doing and what it was depicting. And it gives me goosebumps still today, so many years later, that this mother said, well, we want to go out and be in that circle of caring because what you provided to us is amazing. And I believe it'll give closure to our family to be in that circle of caring.
Wow. Thank you, Nancy. Those visible demonstrations can really be very powerful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Carolyn, you have a comment. Would you like to share it?
Yes. That really just connected with me from the perspective of looking at everyone within the organization as a caregiver. to kind of have that sense of caring community in the organization. So if you're in environmental services, you're a caregiver. You're charged with making sure that the facility and the patient room is cleaned to prevent the spread of infection. If you work in the billing office, thinking about the perspective of a family member who may have lost someone in the organization. And, the person in the billing office may not realize that the bill may have come in the mail the same day that the death certificate arrived. And, you've got someone who may be on the phone who's distraught trying to figure out, how do I handle this? I've lost my family member. That person in the billing office has a huge opportunity to show caring and compassion. So we don't want to segment members of our work force. Oh, the clinical people are the caregivers, but the non-clinical people are not. You really want to set up, that kind of culture where everyone sees themselves as a caregiver. And what we've talked about in the past is this, I guess, urban legend at Nassau, when the EVS worker was asked, well, what do you do in this organization? And he said, well, I put men on the moon. Mm-hmm. So he didn't see himself as a janitor. He saw himself as someone who was putting men on the moon. And I think in healthcare, we need to really have that sort of thinking that everyone matters. Everyone provides care in their own special way, either directly or indirectly, and that care and compassion should be spread throughout the organization.
That was lovely, Carolyn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we have about 12 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we capture any potential actions or any actions that have come out of this session. A couple things that I heard, one big one for the strategic plan in looking at leadership competencies and identifying them in a different way, in a different language. I also heard some actions that we as leaders can take with our own communities, including assessing style needs and being nimble and flexible to try different things. I thought that was really illustrated by Nancy's first story too, in that something's not working, so change directions and not keep just trying to pound it home.
And
go ahead.
There was, I think it's a suggestion, just so we don't lose it, that a paper could be written about that, nimble caring.
Yeah, I absolutely think that would be wonderful. I also liked the connection to the Coos and Posner work that Rodnita was talking about in terms of leading the way and encouraging the heart. And Nancy's story of engaging the entire facility in adapting language. And it's not unheard of. I know when I was working in a community hospital, the same one actually in Virginia, they decided to adapt the Plaintree model. And the Plaintree model has a lot of specific language. It's really caring language, caring for patients, caring for each other, caring for staff, caring for the organization, and identifying that language in the values where people would actually call each other on it, right? That doesn't sound very Plaintree to me, or that sounds really Plaintree. So I think it's not unheard of. And I would love to work on looking at the AONL competencies and moving them from a very technical based language to caring language. And in fact, when we were planning this session, we looked at the nurse executive competencies, and they were even further into the technical language. They didn't even talk about the leader within at all, which is why we decided to use the manager competencies.
Right, right. Yeah, there's some great comments in the chat that that maybe we could talk about. Sabina and Sylvia just posted a couple things. Jalma gave a reference for a book called Managing from the Heart. Actually, there was an article by, I think, Marian Turkel was Leading from the Heart, I believe, as well. So that's present. So Sylvia or Sabina, would you like to share your comments? Sabina,
yeah, I will. I'm not going to talk about what I wrote, but I'm going to talk about. I'm probably one of the oldest people at this meeting, and I remember the day when there was no talk on a hospital floor about economics. And I remember the times when nursing jumped at adopting the language of economics. And in fact, that's pretty, and then perhaps later adopted the language of management. So let's not be shy about establishing the language of nursing in our organizations and expecting persons from other disciplines to know and understand our language just as we know and understand theirs. After all, a healthcare organization is about care. So the language of caring ought to be the most, I'll say dominant, the most frequently, the most natural language for a healthcare organization.
really good point. Thank you.
Yeah.
And
Thank you,
Sabina, just to amplify that just for a second, is that part of what we struggled with and I think presented in transforming organizations to a culture of caring is that economics and caring are not opposite. They're not, they are relational in themselves. So it is to amplify that both languages have meaning and being able to provide care within an organization, and one is silent right now, often silent.
Right. Remember, competence is one of the caring ingredients by Meyerhoff, and competence includes being attuned to the business of caring and the business of taking care of patients and students. Absolutely.
Yes. Sylvia, would you like to share your comment?
Yes, first I want to agree with Sabina and her comments, because my frame of reference is how do we broaden this so that our language is understood and incorporated and integrated to the practice of caring. At the end of the day, I believe that's what we all do, at least in the practice settings that I'm familiar with. And so my comments about the why is an important attempt. Yes, you know, people are excited when they start a new job, it's a new location. Yeah, could you put yourself on mute for a moment? I think that may be causing a little echo. Pardon me. So that is an attempt to connect everyone with why are they here? Everyone has a story, as has been shared already in this hour and a half. So it is a step in the right direction to connect with the caring.
Thanks, Sylvia.
He's speaking, and can you all hear me?
Yep.
Many, many years ago, I did study the meaning of caring in hospital cultures and subsequently expanded to other complex institutions and, began to, by virtue of doing research, was able to identify concepts that not only nurses communicated about the meaning of caring, but also others who were involved in different aspects of an organization. And so that is actually what expanded my own knowledge base and facilitated the help for me to generate the theory of bureaucratic caring, that interrelationship between humanistic, ethical, spiritual caring and concepts that are identified within the complex system, such as the political, the governance structure, the economics, the management of the budget, and the technical, as well as the legal, the rules, regulations, policies, and things of that sort. So subsequently, begin to acknowledge, through research itself about caring, and what was communicated a little while ago was, the idea of, people within organizations, human people have a caring meaning or foundation within themselves, and, and how they express that within the different roles that they have in organizations, as well as and in hospitals, certainly the different units within which people work, and so, I was able to identify those meanings, and then subsequently developed the theory of bureaucratic caring, which, always the concept of bureaucracy has to be articulated, and also has to have some level of understanding and meaning, because most of the time we see bureaucracy as a big red flag, or that it's a negative concept, but all systems are complex bureaucracies because they incorporate these phenomena associated with the governance structure, the political, the economic, the technical, the legal, and those phenomena associated with this idea of the more humanistic and ethical and spiritual concepts of what we identify as caring. So I think that, once we begin to broaden our perspective around organizational caring, I think we have a better understanding of our role as nursing leaders, whether that leadership is, within the context of our relationship with a patient and family, or within, as a nurse, nursing leader or nursing manager. And so I felt that this is something that we have to be cognizant of, and more cognizant of, and attend to. How do we teach and communicate effectively about this meaning in the broadest context possible for the purposes of policy development? I'm also a retired colonel in the U.S. Air Force, and we are developing a person-centered interprofessional caring model based in nursing, which is pretty phenomenal, I think, and it's being communicated across all levels of the national defense, or our Defense Health Agency, to affect the care of 10 million beneficiaries. So we can see, this language of nursing and caring definitely can be understood within a broader context with our colleagues who occupy different roles in these complex systems, so that effective policy can be advanced that can improve the the health and well-being, not only of human persons, but the organization as a living organization itself.
Thank you so much.
Thank
for the
you.
example, Dee. That was excellent. We are at 12:30. And so I want to thank you all for all of your deep listening and sharing your reflections that came as we talked about the stories that we heard, as well as just the comments. And the chat, as you all said, somebody said, was very lively. And so I thank you for your participation.